Thank you, gentlemen. That was very interesting. And I think the one thing that I found kind of fascinating about this is that all three of you weren't sure of what you were all going to say, and yet all of you said similar things that crossed over. So it's I guess, maybe nice to see that there's the continuity as far as some of the challenges as well as the opportunities that you see in this transmission. Richard, I wanted to ask you a question in regards to the fact that we do have some policymakers here in the audience, and thank you, representatives and senators, for being here today, because I think one of the challenges we have is getting your ear and understanding some of the challenges that do come with the siting and construction of new transmission and generation. And so, Richard, what would be, EPRI is known for being so, you guys are scientists. You don't care. You don't advocate one over the other. So here's your chance. What would be the one thing that you would tell the policymakers that they should take into consideration as they're dealing with many of these issues?
Thanks. And I think that there was somebody who said a portfolio approach. I think a portfolio approach is the way it's going to have to go. We're going to have transmission. We're going to have demand response. I think we're going to need storage. There was an NREL. Larry Flower said, hey, we can get 20% wind by 2030 without storage. You might be able to do that, but you're not going to be very comfortable if you're an operator. I think that we're going to start needing some storage. We're going to start needing communications. So we're going to need all those things. I don't know we need a 765 kV overlay. I think that what I would say to regulators is let's take a look at the individual pieces if you tried to solve it with one silver bullet each, and then the other thing would be what would be a hybrid approach, what's the total cost, and then who pays and who gains.
Thank you. We do have several questions here, so thank you, audience, for these questions. One is there any possibility for underground transmission of electricity? I've heard of the new high-tech composite wire. Is this viable?
I got it if you want to. Okay, yeah. There is high voltage transmission. There's as high as 500 kV underground transmission in Japan. It's very expensive, and if you were to do cross-the-country type transmission, it would be seriously order of magnitude more expensive than overhead. So that would be the concern, balancing that. And then from an environmental perspective, a pole every quarter of a mile versus disrupting the ground every foot. The environmentalists would have to argue about that too.
Gigi, let me add one thing there. In terms of cost, there was a big underground project in New England. It was some 345 kV. Normally that might cost, on the upper end, $1 million a mile. They were talking between $25 and $30 million a mile for underground. So that's the order of magnitude when you get to high voltage. It's not the same as a distribution line that there's not a lot of cost. There's tremendous cost differences.
Thank you. Okay, for transmission, what is the percentage of loss for conventional versus DC transmission, and what are the regulatory barriers?
Let me tee it up. Anyway, transmission, the losses, TND, 5, 6, 7% losses in the United States. So, what you generate versus what comes out the meter, 5 or 6%. Different countries have different numbers. Transmission's a smaller number, a couple percent losses. If you go to higher voltages, you're going to reduce the losses. You control the voltages, you can reduce the losses. But in the scheme of things, I don't think it's the big deal as compared to efficiencies in generation or energy efficiency and end use.
Can grid expansion be done without eminent domain, and what would be the alternatives?
I'm going to punt. I think that's all the time we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll just say that I don't think that you're going to find a situation where eminent domain is not ever going to be required. There are just some obstacles that can't be overcome. But I don't know, I don't deal with that area much at all. I think that there is a greater concern on the part of all parties to try to avoid a litigation today, and that every reasonable and practical approach to reaching some type of agreement short of eminent domain should be the priority, at least, of the utilities, I think.
I'd give you a shorter answer, no. Our experience has been there's always a transmission. You may get 95% of the folks to agree to a price. You will always have a small percentage, for whatever reason, feel you just cannot reach an accord with. They do not want the line any way, shape, or form close to them. And that's when, is it a public good you want to do? I think one of the issues that this whole thing raises is when you're building export lines for folks to make money, developers exporting to another state, you run into the multi-state issue, and it goes back to D.C., is what's in it for my state? So I'm going to have all these lines running across all of my constituents' property, and New Mexico gets no benefit because it's going from Texas to California. Those are issues that play out very much locally. The groups, on one hand, they may be very supportive of the environmental community, because a lot of times they've pioneered ways to stop infrastructure that they feel is intrusive. On the other hand, a lot of the environmental community feels that renewables, everybody likes them, and they'll help us get right-of-way, and we find the landowners don't really care. They don't want it. They'll find somebody that takes their side of the story and go as far as they can. So I don't know how you can build it without some ability to have eminent domain and go across folks' land.
So stick with the facts and not the emotion? Okay. Here's a question. There has been a lot of talk about wind and solar. This one has to do with biomass. And is there support for biomass as a renewable energy and using it for peak shaving to back up solar and wind generation?
For us, it was interesting. I was at a meeting in Oklahoma where we were putting forth some transmission plans, and a gentleman spoke up and he said that he had a feedlot in a certain area of Oklahoma and thought that we really should consider routing the transmission by the feedlot. Well, we don't get involved in routing at SPP directly, but I thought he made a good point. I think while there are, I demonstrated to you a huge number of requests for wind generators to interconnect to the grid, we have only 2 solar requests in SPP and none for biomass today. So it's another one of those things that's out there and probably will develop, but it's not a factor for us today.
Okay, and I've been given the sign I can only ask one more question. Why are there no ISOs or RTOs in the Western grid, and should there be?
I'm very opinionated on this one. So, actually, there is one, California ISO. And if you remember the energy crisis of 2001 in California, I think that scared the heck out of everybody else in the West. And we said, we really don't see a benefit of having that. We're not tightly interconnected like portions of the East. There's a lot of cooperations and ownership and joint ownership of facilities. But we just couldn't find a way from a utility perspective where you average the cost and somebody's a big loser and somebody's a big winner. For instance, when you talk about that, averaging or throwing everybody together, it depends on which side of the equation you're on. We would love to partner and have a certain, because our costs are high. Rural, fewer consumers. Some of the more metropolitan utilities would say no way, they have low cost because they have high density. I think that's where you got to in the West was California scared everybody. A lot of them were in their infancy. Most of them have focused now on what can we jointly do together. West Connect's an example. There's a number of joint products all the utilities are using that ISOs use, but there's not all of the functions you have there, not all of the costs. So it's just hasn't panned out in terms of cost and benefit to the consumers from what we've seen.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions, but let's give our panelists a round of applause.
Well, the question of land use and eminent domain came up, and I was given a note here that we overlooked to introduce Pat Lyons, the New Mexico State Land Commissioner. So any eminent domain questions you can send over there. Okay, I've been given the task of wrapping this all up, and I'm just going to take about 3 or 4 minutes. If you don't bring up the slides just yet, but get ready. The topic that I was assigned is where do we go from here? And I think we've seen a lot today, a lot of ideas, a lot of very interesting notions of how we can solve this grid problem. And go ahead and put up that slide. I'd like to end with a quote from actually a sheikh from Saudi, Sheikh Yamani. It says, "The Stone Age did not end due to a lack of stones, and the oil age will not end due to a lack of oil." I think that's what we're seeing. If we wait until oil runs out, we're going to be in a hell of a mess. But with the activity that's going on today, by cooperation, we talked about 3-legged and 4-legged stools, by policy, research, and consumers working together, I think we'll be able to end the oil age long before we run out of oil. And I know that's all of our goal. Here at the Center for Energy Policy, if I can do the next slide, right? I think I can. There we go. We have some upcoming events. We're going to have a workshop on carbon capture and trade. We'll have a colloquium on energy and water, a number of questions on that today. And we'll also have some courses, some professional development courses for energy management. And then finally, we're going to have a dialogue. We'll have a colloquium that has a dialogue between energy producers and consumers, which I think will be a very exciting activity as well. Those are kind of on the order that they'll occur. I believe the carbon cap and trade workshop will probably be this fall, and we'll progress from there. Certainly all of the questions that you asked, I saw some of the questions suggested additional types of events like workforce development, and we certainly will take those into consideration and try and work them into our schedule. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. I hope you enjoyed the presentations, got something out of it, and I hope you give something back to us as well. So thank you very much.